I'm Michalis Panagiotakis for Together for Europe. We're talking today with Sven Franck, a leading MEP candidate for the French Volt Europa, if I remember correctly, in 2024, and the candidate for co-chair of Volt Europa. It is probably, Volt is probably the most successful attempt in creating a federalist, let's say, pan-European party, in the sense that it now has 5 representatives in the European Parliament. It seems to be something that has potential and is growing. I would like to welcome you, first of all, Mr. Franck, Sven, in this podcast, and thank you for your participation. But I would like to start a statement I read in your page, where you say that the European Parliament is the wrong place to advance the European project towards a federal Europe. It sits at the end of the legislative food chain and has no leverage towards treaty reforms or put any of our objectives on the legislative agenda. We need to look for a more crafty way to influence national governments and push the needle towards where Europe has to go, becoming a genuine political and geopolitical player on a global scale. If nationalists brazenly call for dismantling the European Union, powered by Trump's and Putin's heralds, federalists must also call for full European integration and find supporters that can help us get the ball rolling. Now, this is a very interesting statement because it ties with one of the questions I wanted to ask you. Volt Europa has a particular political profile, right? It's social liberal in the scheme of things, as we might call it in Europe. It belongs to the Green Group in the European Parliament. Yet, in order for a federalist attempt to be successful, it will have to involve people from different parts of the political spectrum. And the interesting thing that is happening is that after the recent geopolitical turmoil we're living through, a lot of people from across the political spectrum, from the left to the right, are now talking about federalism in a much more concrete way, as a much more realistic prospect. However, one has to find a common language for these people in order to make a political movement, let's say, to create a political movement, a movement towards this, towards European Federation. We would have to create a narrative about what it means for everyone.
Since I'm going for my campaign, I'm visiting our local teams in all 27 member states. It's very interesting how Volt is perceived from country to country. For example, I started in Volt France when I joined Volt, and there we are more in the green corner. In the Netherlands, we're more liberal. In Germany, I think we're more social democratic. I don't think we have a conservative country, but if you go more to Central Europe, we have a more, let's say, more central positioning as well. And so I think we need to, how is it like, for example, for me, that's pragmatism. Let's say, like, we need to be pragmatic if we want to create a majority to push for federalization of Europe. And I think Robert Menasse, the book author, said it very well on a recent panel I did. He said the ideology of the middle is to be free of ideologies. And I like that, actually. And he said that's where most of the people feel at home. And that's where you also have the majorities. And sometimes with the left side, sometimes with the right side. And I think federalism, you can make a case for, I always say, for all our 4 colors. So if I take green for ecologists, my example is always, imagine one country closes a coal power plant and across the border they're building one. So you need a European perspective. This doesn't work. The same thing for yellow liberal. You could say without a proper capital market integration, all our good startups will leave for United States. So same thing, we need to work together. Same for I lived already in Germany, Austria, France, and Slovenia. So I paid into pension in 3 countries, and now I'm trying to avoid having to pay into the pension system in the 4th country, because I am already afraid this will be a catastrophe when I finally retire in 25 years, how I actually get a pension. So the European Economic Zone also creates social and democratic challenges. Also, I'm now out of Germany for 20 years. In 5 years, I actually lose my voting rights in German elections because I'm gone for more than 25 years. So also in these aspects, I think there's a lot to do. And I could even find conservative reasons. For example, I think handling immigration on national level just makes no sense. It's just bureaucracy times 27, where we should have maybe European protection of the external borders and the joint system, which helps the countries on the borders and does it in a European way. And that's a very conservative topic for me. So I think there's points to connect. And I see Volt's role as a majority builder by trying to be free of ideology. And I think that's our unique angle, in my opinion, where I can give you an example. In France, I was running in 2020 in the local elections, and we were in the coalition with the Green Party. The French local election has 2 rounds. And so after the first round, we were almost in first place. So I said, hey, we just joined with the Liberals, and then we will take the town hall. I almost got stoned for daring to say we do something with the Liberals. Because in French national politics, this is not a typical bridge to build. And so I see Volt, by having the 4 colors and the 4 streams, I hope we can also help to build those bridges, which we need if we want to go towards a federal Europe.
Also, there's, of course, defense, which is a pan-European thing.
Exactly.
Because we have 27 armies. We say we don't spend enough. We spend more than enough, but it's just spent into 27 different armies and 27 different infrastructures, right?
Yes, and it's for me a big danger, actually, because we are not creating a European army, but we are rearming everybody. And then imagine what happens if the United States and their national security policy works and they advocate for regime change, and we end up with a lot of extreme right governments with a lot of weapons. And I mean, buying weapons is not like building bridges. Building bridges you can use in peace by driving over it. But what do you do with all those weapons? At some point, people will say, hey.
Yes.
So it poses a real danger, in my opinion, that we are doing 27 rearmament efforts instead of doing it together.
Yes. But this ties with Europe's footprint in global events. I mean, one question could be, can Europe remain relevant in a world setting if it doesn't federalize? Because it seems to me that already the European Union is having a very submissive attitude towards the quote-unquote superpowers. Well, actually not quote-unquote. We have now 2 superpowers. Europe is not one of them. And you have a third smaller military power, which is Russia. And it seems to be that Europe cannot possibly try to compete if it doesn't federalize. I can't see how 27 different countries can do that.
I agree. I mean, you already see it in foreign policy currently. So the Commission cannot say much, because as soon as they say something, a few member states say, how to say it, 5, and tell Ursula von der Leyen, hey, you can't say that. And also we have almost more than 20 years without treaty reforms. And I always say, imagine the world 20 years ago, how much has changed in the last 20 years. But the European treaties, it's like you don't update your laptop for 20 years and pretend it will still work or not crash immediately. And I think the population is already there. Like if you look at the Eurobarometer, which comes out every 6 months, it has so much support for a more integrated, more united, which for me means also more federal European Union. Like everybody knows it, but nobody, and that's for me the issue, nobody takes the lead, because in the end, in Europe, we have 27 national leaders. Even if you say somebody like Macron is a European, at the end of the day, for example, for Mercosur, the trade agreement, he voted French, the same way as Friedrich Merz in Germany for the combustion engine, he'll decide German and not European. And this is for me the missing step, that we don't really have European leadership. And it's also my main pitch for running for Volt Europa Co-President, because I think we're also in a unique position to try to become such a platform for European political leadership. Somebody needs to say, like you saw maybe in the news, that also in Germany, Friedrich Merz is attacking the Commission for they shouldn't do so many laws, and Germany wants to have a veto in every legislative proposals. Somebody needs to not only in Germany say, hey, that's not how it works, and you cannot hide your you should not blame Europe for whatever national failures you have in your political program. So I think we need a counterweight to national politics having too much influence or holding down federalization too much. And I think that's a role I would like Volt to play much more actively. That's all.
Also, there's a question of creating a unitary political space, right? Because now you have 27 different debates, political debates, and there is no, I mean, the debates in one country does not affect the other. And in order to have a unified sort of agenda and to democratize decision making, you spoke about the Mercosur example or the rearmament example, etc. But the way you can do that competently is if you have a pan-European discussion on these issues and decide what is more important or what isn't. Isn't that the case? And how do you see yourselves participating, in helping create this space?
Yes, so I call it a European media space because I have the influence or the impression that a lot of, and I also read it in David Keating's book, The Owned Continent, which also talks a lot about where are all the media, the big media publishers based, and they're all more or less UK or United States based. So the politics, we hear more about Trump than we hear about what happens in our neighborhood. So this is hard to change, but I think we need to make the step because actually what happens in Slovenia, for example, where I live now, we had parliament elections 3 weeks ago, and we might end up with, I say it's a mini Orban since we're a smaller country, but we might have a new head of state who will follow the patterns of Viktor Orban and block everything. And so what happens in Slovenia matters in all the other countries. And I think the media space needs, and I see a lot of things happening. For example, the French, it's called L'Express newspaper. They said in January they want to become a European newspaper by translating everything in all languages and having also much more European angle on politics. And I thought, look, it's in France, that's unheard of because France stops at the border. You have a newspaper which says, hey, look, actually there's stuff happening beyond the border and it's actually important. So we should write about it. So I also have the feeling in the same way as the general population can identify more with the idea of a joint Europe, just out of necessity, maybe. The media is also starting to pick up on it. And I think there also you can play a role with Volt by, for example, on my tour, I was in Poland a few weeks ago. And I was speaking with a journalist from a newspaper, and she said there's no real pro-European voice today in the Polish political spectrum because even the government is too afraid of the extreme right in the Polexit debate. And there needs to be someone who takes a stand and says, hey, actually Europe is good for something, like giving examples and taking a stand. And I think Volt can do that. I mean, we should not be afraid to where national politics is maybe afraid.
There are other issues, of course, like, for example, the issue of tech sovereignty and the pressure that Europe has been taking from the Trump administration to change its laws to allow monopolies, pretty much American monopolies, to monopolize the European technological space. And I think that could that be one of the actions through which, like, sort of a European quote-unquote industrial policy, one form or another, like what both China and the US have been doing for the past years?
Yes, so and I totally agree. It's also where my day job is. I work in tech. We are working on a research paper proposal for artificial intelligence, and it's always so for me there's actually two issues. Issue number one is the influence of non-European actors on our tech markets. This can be cloud infrastructure, but as social media just as well. So it's not only industrial, it's also a consumer question. And the other thing is then what does the European Union actually do against it? So I know, for example, there's a democracy shield coming, but in the end, I'm saying, is it can you answer extreme right parties doing TikTok videos by doing your own TikTok videos, or shouldn't we regulate social media in the same way as classical media is regulated, where you also cannot do anything and write everything you want? So I think there's a lot of topics which actually need a much more policy reply whether in consumer media, but also in technology. And the technology example which I wanted to give, which I see at my work, is that, for example, to Horizon funding for European research, it usually goes to industry incumbents. It doesn't go to startups. And there's a study from last year from the German IFO Institute and Italian Bocconi University, who looked at the last 10 years of European research funding. And they said, look, actually, most of it goes to companies who are not innovative at all. It's like the usual suspects in every country. And the startups who actually have a proven track record of delivering innovation, they only get breadcrumbs. So we're also not doing ourselves a favor, to come back to your question. If we want to have technological sovereignty, we also need to provide the means, like the US and China are doing, to our startups to build that. We cannot just, finance industry, old industry, who don't take the next step to actually be competitive in the markets of tomorrow. We need to be much more startup focused, and we have the potential. Like in my area of work, which is more telecommunications, there's really good companies in Europe, especially in France, who actually are competitive with even US and Chinese providers, but they don't get the usual challenges you get. For seed funding, Europe is okay, because even you can do it on member state level, but then growth funding, then you run into the issues of the countries are too small. Like you can finance a Slovenian startup to get, to set up, but then if the product is really good and you need to do the next level financing, then Slovenia is way too small. There's no capital market integration. And so high probability the startup will say, okay, I need to go to US to fund that. And there we're losing all our creative potential. So I think there needs to be a lot of policy change, and then we will also become more technologically independent.
One of the things I'm sort of seeing is that people that we're seeing with the people that sort of created Together for Europe, they're all from, a lot from the technological sector, but also from the small SME
Yes.
sort of scene in Europe. And these are the people that need less of convincing, let's say, in order for the further, because they see the problems day to day, right? But the question is, how do you get other parts of the European population, people who work for a living, people who are farmers, people who are blue-collar workers, etc., etc. How do you get them? How do you involve them in this project?
So I think it's a general issue of politics being too far from citizens. I would say even national politics. That also explains for me to a large part why extreme right and also extreme left in many countries have so high voting shares. And then Europe is even further away. Like and I can give you a good example of what works is for European citizen initiatives. Maybe you remember the last one was My Voice, My Choice. So European citizen initiative means if you can propose a topic to the European Commission, if you can collect 1 million signatures in 1 year in 7 countries, then they actually need to treat it. And it's a unique instrument which only exists in Europe. But then every time one initiative manages to reach the 1 million threshold, the Commission tries to dodge a bit actually treating it.
Yes, I've seen that, yes.
And so it's also one thing I would like to try if I'm co-president of Volt Europa, how you also work in tech, DDoS, or weaponize the Commission by doing as many citizen initiatives as possible to get also citizens more involved, because this way citizens see, hey, I can actually participate in the legislative process on European level. That would apply to business owners the same way as to farmers, civil society, and then also showing with the shortcomings, where then actually, if you reach such a threshold, where it stops or where it's blocked, so that we can then say, hey, look, the idea was good, but it doesn't have a majority. Or we can say the idea was good, it has a majority, but the Commission doesn't want to treat it. And you get more visibility in the European legislative process. And I think that's one aspect, how to get people more involved. And the other one, I think, is the emotional aspect. And it's even a Greek person, Margaritis Chinas. I once saw on a panel, and he said, Europe will only work if we have more European events. And today we only have 2, Eurovision and Champions League. Unless we make more, people will not feel European. So, and I thought he had a good point. And so one thing I'm pushing, for example, is to have May 9th, which is coming up, Europe Day, to be a public holiday, because then people actually understand, hey, I have a day off. Why? First question. And then you start to be curious, maybe. And then maybe also start to identify more with what it means. And I think there needs to be more things like this where people can easily understand what's happening and why something is happening to feel more European. For me, feeling European doesn't mean you have to feel less national. I always say the European identity you cannot create. It's the sum of our 27 national identities. And there's some nice articles would say, hey, if you wouldn't have had, for example, democracy in Europe, Cleisthenes in Greece did the base, Martin Luther reduced the influence of the church, the French Revolution made equality before the law. So those are deeply national events, but they all somehow are building blocks of our European identity. We just need to find the formats where we can cherish and celebrate them more, like Eurovision, like Champions League, and let's see what other things we can come up with. And I think, for example, having a public holiday on May 9th, it's relatively easy. I mean, it will have a cost, but it's easy to implement. It's not like you need to change a lot of paperwork for it. And we need stuff like that.
Also, of course, one can suggest that having common procurement for welfare, set a minimum standard for welfare provision in Europe, or guarantees, working guarantees, working life guarantees could also be something that is attractive and understandable to a lot of people.
Yes, I still think the portion of people, especially in bigger countries, who live and work in another country is still relatively small. Now in Slovenia, I see it's relatively big, but in Germany, it's not so many. But the more you live and work in another country, the more it starts to be interesting. So I can give you my concrete example. German driver license expired last year, and I still work in France. And so if I go here to the ministry, they say, sorry, you work in France, not my problem. And the French ministry says, sorry, you live in Slovenia, also not my problem. And the Germans don't reply. So currently, I don't have a driver's license. I would like a valid one. But I mean, there you can see the shortcomings of the European Union. And people would understand that if they had a European driver's license, and easy peasy. Yeah.
Okay. So let me sort of end this small discussion with a question. Now, we have an organization, Together for Europe. We are a citizens initiative. We started because some people across Europe realized during the pandemic that the European Union, the Union's response was not efficient, not sufficient, and that the only way out of this incapacitation of Europe was of a federal structure. Now, what role do citizens' initiatives like Together for Europe could play in creating the atmosphere, creating the prerequisites or the discussion in Europe for European Federation?
I wouldn't even say could play. You already play it, and I mean, there's many. There's in every country has its associations. There's also European one, like the European federalists, and I think just by being there and talking about it, you bring awareness for the topic. For example, like I said, I lived 15 years in France, and federalism in France used to be the F word. Like, you don't even talk about it. But you can see now the sentiment is even in France changing in the population. And the European Federalists in France, where I'm still a member, of course, they're like, hey, for the first time in 20, 30 years, people are actually listening more to what we are saying. And so I think you are a bit you provide the narrative, or you provide the space for discussion. I also always say federalism needs to have a definition at some point. Everybody thinks something different, and this doesn't help.
And a discussion also, right? We have to have a discussion about what it means. It could mean different things for different people.
And I always say, I don't want to end up in the United States of Europe in system format, because Europe is different. And I always say France is not Kentucky, so you can maybe make United States with states like Kentucky, but not with European countries which have such a long history totally different way of democracy. So our version of a federal Europe, I hope, will look much different than what you have, for example, in the United States today. So, and that's what you say. I think there needs to be a debate, and I think civil society initiatives and associations are, for me, the ambassadors or the evangelists of this of driving this debate and discussion. So yes, you have a very important role, in my opinion.
Okay, so Sven Franck, thank you very much for your participation and the discussion we just had. I wish you the best in your coming election for the co-chairmanship of the Volt Party, and for great success to Volt Party Europa as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And yes, it was a pleasure. Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Bye.